Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Portland's own Citizens Forum. My name is Susan Hammer, and I am president of City Club. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you, as I always do, to please turn off your cell phones and other noise-making devices. Before our program begins, I'd like to make a few announcements about things that are going on at City Club. Next Friday's forum is called The Latest Power Play, New Developments in Biomass, Ocean Wave, and Green Nuclear Energy. We'll have 3 outstanding individuals from Oregon State University with us. This is a program you won't want to miss. There is more information about it in the Friday forum. This will be our last program of the summer before we take our summer break and then resume again on Friday, September 8th. Our Citizens Read book for this month is called Storm Riders. It's written by Craig Leslie, who's an Oregon writer, and this is an Oregon-based novel. The group will be meeting at City Club Commons on Monday the 31st of July, and anyone can come, members and non-members alike. Please call the City Club office and let them know that you'll be coming. Our Citizen Salon series continues through the summer. We still have some room open at some of the salons, and there are programs in the back of the room that tell you what remains and what is open. If you have not yet been to a Citizen Salon, you really must take this opportunity. It's a great time to talk with other City Club members and citizens of Portland about the issues that matter most and to help raise funds to support City Club. Details about all events that are going on at City Club can be found on the website, www.pdxcityclub.org, and you can also find them in your weekly bulletin. You can find information about membership, and anyone here who's a guest today and is not a member, I would like to invite you to join. There's also information about our TV and radio broadcast schedule, and of course there's the Citizens Blog, our online forum. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce 3 new members that we have for City Club today, and when you hear your name, would you please stand, and then we will recognize you all. First person is Ann Barden. Second person is Susan Davis, and third, Nick Orphanauskas. Welcome. We are so fortunate in Portland to have great corporate citizens that help make these programs possible. Our corporate sponsors this quarter are Stoll Reeves LLP and Kaiser Permanente. Could you please join me in thanking them? Our program today is entitled Connecting Portland to the Global Economy, Trade, Transportation, and the Port of Portland. A few weeks ago, I arrived in the Portland International Airport, having returned from Reno, and rather than seeing slot machines, aisles of t-shirts, haphazard commercial banners for LASIK surgery and nightclubs, I saw a soothing expanse of green carpet, tasteful restaurants and shops like the Real Mother Goose, Norm Thompson's, and Powell's. I saw inspiring architectural lines and a breathtaking glass canopy outside, connecting the terminal and the parking structure. And I said, as I have so many times, we have the most aesthetically pleasing airport in the world. Now, I was just one of some 14 million passengers that go through our PDX each year. So this is my first image of what the Port of Portland does. But there's so much more that the Port of Portland does that meets the eyes, both in terms of aviation and marine activities. Believe it or not, the port has a deep draft container terminal that holds a container ship that is almost twice as long as Big Pink is high. Imagine that. We have the #1 auto port on the West Coast, importing 350,000 cars, Hyundais, Hondas, and Toyotas, entering the U.S. through Portland each year. And we are the #1 wheat port in the United States. And did you know that 1 out of 8 jobs in the metropolitan area is tied to port activities? Here to tell us more about what's going on in the port is Bill Wyatt, Executive Director of the Port of Portland. Bill is a native of Astoria, Oregon. He's been Executive Director of the Port of Portland for almost 5 years, and he's held a number of other very important public service positions. He was Chief of Staff to the former Oregon Governor, John Kitzhaber. He was President of the Oregon Business Council. He was Executive Director of the Association for Portland Progress, then Portland's Downtown Development Association. He was also State Representative from Astoria in the 70s. Bill's favorite thing about his job is being able to direct a public agency with a public mission and accomplishing that mission through private means. When he's not working for the Port of Portland, believe it or not, Bill, who has a job that involves a lot of travel, actually likes to travel. His next trip is to India this September. Would you please provide a warm welcome to Bill Wyatt?
Thank you, Susan. You're doing a great job. If you'd like to just, keep on going, I'm all right with that. Well, thank you very much. I'm reminded as you're going through my resume that I'm here amongst my past and present lawyers. Chip Lazenby on my right here was the governor's legal counsel for 7.5 years, tried mightily and occasionally with success to keep me out of trouble. And Carla Kelly, who chairs the City Club's program committee, is general counsel here. It takes 2 lawyers to make sure that I don't do anything too inappropriate. It's been, I think, a while since I was here, and typically it's July when the port shows up at the City Club. A beautiful 105-degree day out there, and I can see a lot of open collars. I appreciate that. I declared yesterday to be Hawaiian Shirt Day at the port, and I think we're going to make that a permanent extension of our human resources policy. And I'm sure we're all getting ready for the weekly version of the weekly beer, wine, food, or music festival that occurs on the waterfront just in time for the light and frothy topic of global trade, infrastructure, and land use policy. So I will try to make this as light and pleasant as possible, and maybe a little punchy, and hopefully leave enough time for some questions, which I think are oftentimes the best part of these fabulous forums. And I also just want to add my congratulations to the City Club. I think, first of all, I'm stunned to see how many people are out here on a day like this for a topic like this, and I think that speaks very well to the City Club, to the membership, the program committee, and to the staff who've really done a terrific job of making this institution an important and relevant part of the civic life of our community. Well, for me, this is, I'm coming up on 5 years in this job. Some of you may remember the rather unusual circumstances of my arrival at the port. My successor, or my predecessor, Mike Thorne, had departed several months earlier, and the commission decided they would have a public selection process for the executive director, which included, among other things, a live cable TV interview with all of the 4 finalists up on the dais, which was, to be sure, an unusual experience. And this went on for some time, and ultimately the commission selected me, for which I was and remain very grateful. And this was on September 4th. My wife, Mary, and I had just dropped our son off at college for his first year, so kind of a life-changing moment, and we took off to see friends in Europe. on the 8th of September 2001, where we were when those horrific events of September 11th occurred, and which have, I think, continued to have tremendous impact on the nature of our organization and the services we provide, and the way in which the community interacts with our facilities, obviously at the airport, but not exclusively. And it's been I would say these 5 years have been a wild, bumpy, exhilarating ride. We are, as I was saying to Susan earlier, I find myself and our organization, we're often on the cutting edge of global trade and occasionally on the bleeding edge. And it's, I think, been, as I said, a terrific experience, but one that tells me that the path ahead is going to be windy and bumpy for us, and I think therefore for our community as well, because we're experiencing and seeing forces on a global scale that we really have not had much experience with as a community or as a country, and I think part of the excitement for us, frankly, is being able to help lead the way. And I am encouraged by virtue of a tremendously talented workforce that we have at the port, many of whom are well represented here today, and I'm optimistic about our ability to help do that. But if you think about some of the events for the port over the course of the last 5 years, they're pretty extraordinary, beginning, of course, with 9/11. The airport is what I would characterize as an enterprise operation. Nobody parks, nobody flies, nobody shops, we make no money. And we have something like $500 million of debt, and unfortunately those pesky bondholders expect to be paid off. So by the time we returned from this trip, I sat down with our then CFO and I said, hey, how are we doing? And there was a period of about a week or two where we were not certain that we were going to be able to successfully retire our debt, make payments. And we were in good company. Every other airport in the country was in the same circumstance, but that's obviously been challenging, and it's caused us really to think about our capital needs and our policies related to reserve, and we have a very strong balance sheet at the airport as a result of that. So it had a tremendous, I think, positive impact in terms of our own approach. A couple of years later, we experienced the effects of a lockout of the longshoremen from not only our facilities, but up and down the West Coast, and once again discovered that if there is no activity moving across the docks, nobody's paying us any money. And this underscores one of the unique features that Susan referenced when she introduced me, and frankly, it's one of the things that I really like about our operation. 97% of our revenues come from business transactions. That creates for us opportunities that a lot of public agencies don't have. It also creates some tremendous challenges. And I'd like to tell you that this is all by choice, but of course the voters over a course of time have constrained property taxes, which is our source of tax revenue, to the extent that there really aren't any choices for us. So we have taken this to heart. We're not whining. We'll go do our job. But every once in a while, an event occurs that reminds us that we are tied directly to not only the local economy, the local economic circumstance, but what's happening globally. These global forces are changing in enormous and significant ways, and so it's caused us to pay much, much more attention to the business models that our foreign partners are using and that they find important, because frankly, if they're not making a buck, they're not going to be here. And it's I think changed our approach in some significant, important, and ultimately very successful ways. Back in the year 2000, and I'm going to talk more about this a little later, The Environmental Protection Agency declared a large portion of the lower Willamette to be a Superfund. And I'm here to tell you that we own a certain share of the responsibility for resolving this. This is about 100 years worth of industrial activity on the river, in large measure, for our part at least, caused by people like the United States Navy, and we're looking forward to their help and partnership in resolving their past problems, and I've been assured that that'll happen at some point in the very distant future. But that's a big responsibility for us because, again, we don't have ratepayers, we don't have the normal resources that one would go to help resolve this. At the same time, the harbor is a working harbor. It's very important to us. And so our goal is to resolve that effectively, efficiently, cost-effectively, and quickly, if possible. And I would say all of the forces that I have experienced around the Superfund militate against that. More expensive, longer time. And so, as I said, I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then I think finally, particularly in our marine business, the global force that has had the greatest impact on us, you've read about it, has to do with the nature of U.S. trade. We're importing much, much more than we're exporting, at least in terms of containerized cargo, because we have a lot of exports that people don't really think about. They're intellectual exports, but unfortunately we haven't found a way yet to put that in a box. We're working on it, but we're not able to benefit directly from that in the seaport. Many of those exports do go out on Lufthansa and on Northwest Airlines, but for us this has been a big shift. And the shift comes because our seaport here in Portland, which is so much a part of the history of this community and of this region, was created to send things that we make and that we grow and that we produce here to other parts of the world. That's really why the Port of Portland exists as a marine, as a maritime entity. And in the container business, all of the carriers, most of the shippers are focused primarily on bringing things from there to here. And so this has created conflict. This two-way conflict is exacerbated by the fact that the carriers make a lot more money bringing things here than taking things there. So we've had to really refocus our strategy and try to, frankly, capitalize on the lack of West Coast infrastructure for this business, the need for importers to come to this country, and hopefully, while they're here, take exports back to our key markets in Asia. And we've achieved a degree of success here, although it's still a very volatile business, and we have a great deal of work to do. And so I'll talk a bit more about that. The final thing I want to talk about in a few moments has to do with land use and the connection between local land use decisions and international trade. And there's a more direct connection than you can imagine. And I think the experience I've had over the course of the last week underscores that. Having gone down to the Portland City Council on Wednesday and tried to convince them not to put high-density housing between two gasoline tank farms on the one hand, and having spent the evening last night out in Hillsborough meeting with the community and talking about the really horrific crash of this antique jet during the Hillsborough Air Show. And so I'll talk a little more about that because these are choices that we can make that have a tremendous effect on our ability to interact with global commerce. Before I get all to that, I want to issue a few thank yous. And let me start with something that was news this week and very important news for us related to a program called Connect Oregon. This was a program that Governor Kulongoski initiated with the legislative leadership, and it's been, from our vantage point, I might say, a terrific success, but it emanates from this particular challenge in Oregon, and that is that virtually all of the transportation dollars that we raise in Oregon come from sources like the gas tax or autos or trucks. And our state constitution requires that those resources be used for roads. Legislature after legislature, governor after governor, transportation director after transportation director have tried to find every convenient means possible to get around this particular challenge, and occasionally have succeeded but have largely failed. So the governor initiated a program. The legislature agreed to put up $100 million of lottery money to focus primarily on those transportation needs of our state that were not otherwise qualified for gas tax resources, things like marine facilities, aviation facilities, smaller airports, rail, and transit. And all of those, and on a statewide basis, got some resources out of this program over the course of the last few days. The Transportation Commission just acted. For us, it means a brand new 60 long ton, 18 wide post-Panamax container crane. And I'm just here to tell you that it doesn't get any better than this either. If you ever want to come out and take a look, give us a ring, because we like showing it off. It's hard to see. It's not close to any residential facilities. It's not easily accessible, and as a result of marine security, these are tough things to see and to experience. It's an extraordinary piece of infrastructure, and it's vital. We're also getting a new rail storage yard out in Rivergate. You think, well, you know, what's that? Here's what it is: 6 new storage tracks that will allow us to store up to 4 unit trains of things like grain, for example. 4 unit trains is a shipload of grain. If they're being stored on these new tracks, they're not sitting on the main line of the Union Pacific or the Burlington Northern, which prohibits them then from using that main line for other cargoes. So these are the kind of investments that are largely hidden from public view, but are absolutely vital to keep up the pace of freight and flow that is so much a part of our economy, and a part of our economy that so few people really get to see or tangibly experience. So we're very excited about it. And this crane, let me just make a couple of comments about it, because I think it's a fascinating piece of equipment. It's enormous. It's about half the size of the U.S. Bank Tower. In terms of its width, it's about as high, so it's pretty extraordinary in that regard alone. It can move about 30 of these containers back and forth per hour, which is kind of the West Coast average. That's very significant. But just as an employer, this little piece of machinery requires about 22 longshoremen to operate in various pieces of the operation. On an hourly basis, it generates about $2,100 of payroll. You don't get to hire it by the hour. You hire it by 8 hours. So the carrier leaves behind about $16,500 per hour for this crane in very high-wage, blue-collar jobs here. I was telling the story to a couple of our folks the other day. Hyundai Merchant Marine, which used to call in Portland, came here with large ships. They'd come in, they'd load, they unload, and they'd leave behind every week, because it was a weekly service, $180,000 worth of longshore payroll. So this infrastructure is incredibly important. In the same period of time, in the period of an hour, it will unload about $1.5 million worth of cargo, and it will load about $500,000 worth of export cargo. So the values here are enormous. It's a vital piece of equipment. It's the sort of thing that almost no one ever gets to see in a place like Portland, because this is one of those rare instances where land use has worked to the advantage of a major industrial facility and kept it away from congested residential neighborhoods. So we're very excited, and my thanks to the governor and to the legislative leadership and to the members of the legislative of the last session of the legislature. International Air Service has been a great story here in Portland over the course of the last few years. We went from calling ourselves an international airport only because Air Canada flew from here to Vancouver to an airport that now has nonstop service to continental Europe, nonstop service to continental Asia, and nonstop service to Mexico. All of them are growing. They're doing very well. They leave behind about $200 million in local purchases and payroll, not to mention the extraordinary impacts they have otherwise. And they are vital for business travel in particular because they take literally hours and hours out of each trip for those for that intellectual capital that we are exporting. Alan Alley, who's the CEO of Pixelworks, once told me that when we added the nonstop Asian service, we gave him 2 weeks a year of additional time. So he's not alone. People who travel a lot really appreciate these services. They're vital. Not to mention the incredible thrill that I get every time I'm in Frankfurt. You go into the main hall, you see this huge black board up there with all the great cities and great capitals of the world, and there's Portland. And I think that it's a metaphor for what has made this so successful. But you know, it would not have happened if the major traveling businesses in this region hadn't stepped up and said, you know what, I know it's going to cost us a little bit more. It does for nonstop service. But having that nonstop service is important to us. It's important to our employees. We'll make that commitment. So people like Nike and Freightliner, Adidas, Columbia Sportswear, Pixelworks, Mentor Graphics, Intel, and others really did step up, and they have committed themselves to using these services, and they're doing it. And if you've ever paid for a business class ticket, you appreciate the difference between what it costs up front and what it costs in the back, and that's where they make their money. That's what brings these carriers to Portland, their ability to do it. So a real thank you to them. In our container business, I want to say thank you very much to Hanjin Shipping. Hanjin is a Korean firm. They stuck with us when times were tough. They've been here for a long time, but the reason they stuck with us, in addition to the fact that we're really nice people, is that Fred Meyer stuck with them. And Fred Meyer, now owned by Kroger, has, for a variety of reasons, been very engaged in Kroger's overall logistics operation. And they decided back when the West Coast was melting down, before the West Coast was melting down, that they'd use Portland. That brought Hanjin here. It brought Hanjin here with larger vessels. And because they stayed, we had the wherewithal to go out and buy ourselves a crane when we couldn't afford it, and to get on the plane ourselves and go shop for more carriers. And I want to recognize them: Zim Integrated Shipping, Yang Ming, China Ocean Shipping, China Shipping, CSAV Norasia, all new carriers here, and Hapag-Lloyd, the now owner of CP Ships. They provide service from here to northern Europe. These are all new services and very, very important for us. A decade ago, we had no direct service to China. Today, we have 6 weekly stops, which is very, very important for both importers and for exporters. The Columbia River Channel Project, which has been hugely important to us, is underway. This is a project that I thought would be concluded at the end of my life. It's underway, it's happening. We're getting advantages from it right now, and I want to pay special homage to the combined political leadership of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and to the literally hundreds of associations and businesses who stepped up to provide support whenever it's been required. There is a theme here, and that is we have taken to heart the importance and the value of reaching out to the community, because on a global scale, we're not the largest region in the world. If we want to stay connected, we have to work harder, try harder, be smarter, and really pull together. And that's what we've tried to do as we have approached these services and these activities. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's played a part of that. Now, I think no speech from a port director or anybody involved in transportation would be complete without a little whining about the lack of attention to important infrastructure needs. And even though I think we have made some big progress here, big challenges remain. I'm always struck when I travel to Asia about the almost unbelievable scale of infrastructure development that is occurring in that country. Now, they have a long ways to go because they started with, in particular in places like China, virtually nothing. So they do have a long ways to go, and I'm not here to tell you that it's all good. They've made some huge errors and mistakes, but there is a national will that is driving them to build this infrastructure and to be competitive and to create an economy that can be successful on a global scale. And my sense, at least, is that is not the same kind of will that I sense in this country today. We don't have the same commitment. And I'll give you an example. The Shanghai is located on the Yangtze River. It was a very important export center for China. And the Yangtze River is a tough place for deep draft container vessels because it's fast moving and silt filled, and they just can't dredge fast enough, frankly, to maintain berth space. So they go 28 miles out into the South China Sea. They lop off the top of an island. They build a bridge all the way out there and create a series of marine terminals that will ultimately have as many as 500 container berths. Now, I'm not proposing that we think about any such thing because it would be impossible and inappropriate and unnecessary, but it just is a measure of how committed they are to their presence in the global economy. One little example that I would to bring to your attention today has to do with the last reauthorization of the Federal Transportation Bill, for some reason euphemistically known as Safety Lou. And I can't remember what the acronym is, but just a little kind of a comparison. The U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that the cost of maintaining the interstate system for the length of this reauthorization, which I think is another couple of years or 3 years, is $375 million. The Congress ultimately appropriated $275 million and no more, because that would have required a gas tax increase, which just wasn't going to fly. Now, that would be bad enough because that just tells you we're not keeping up with the maintenance requirements that we have on what we already possess, not the least consideration to building more, except that a very good portion of that, $276 million, was taken in earmarks for things that you could hardly describe as vital to the national interest. I won't go into great detail, but the bridge to nowhere in Alaska comes to mind. And so what ends up going into the maintenance of the interstate system is a far cry from what was appropriated. What was appropriated was completely inadequate. Well, this, has been a trend in coming for some time. And it's pretty clear to me that the basic message from the federal government, it's not necessarily a direct message, but you don't have to see too much or read too much to appreciate where they're going to be over the course of the next few years, given the fiscal commitments and obligations that they are creating for themselves, is you're on your own. States and local governments, you're on your own. And this is a tough message because being on your own presents a pretty steep bill. Now, the original speech here that my able staff had put together for me said, well, this is a topic for another time. But actually, I think it's a topic for right now. I think it's very important that we just get out of the denial here, as they say, it's not just a river in Egypt, and start creating our own bold solutions to this. Things like tolling, for example. There are a couple of projects underway here now. Get used to the idea, okay? This is a state that doesn't want to pump its own gas, but I'm going to tell you, if we don't start embracing these creative solutions, the infrastructure that we have is going to deteriorate. The new things we need is not going to materialize. Things like public-private partnerships, and we have a great example right now here in Portland, Cascade Station, out by the airport. Here's the deal. This community decided, and I think it was a widespread consensus, that having invested as much as we did in the light rail system, wouldn't it be great to extend that to the airport? Well, no one could come up with the money to do it. And so a basic transaction occurred. The Bechtel Corporation said, okay, we'll build the light rail system from the gateway stop to the airport. You give us the development rights at Cascade Station, which is an area close to the airport. We got our light rail. It took Bechtel a few years longer than they wanted to get their development rights, but it's going to be a terrific development. They, by the way, are investing in the transportation congestion issues that will be created by this development. So it isn't perfect. If I had my druthers, I'd rather have someone hand me a check for light rail or for this or for that, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. And I think there are lots of opportunities in this community and in this region to do the same thing. And if we really want these things, I think the time is now to give the green light to our elected leaders to begin exploring these things, which will mean and do mean changes for all of us in how we interact with these facilities. Things like tolls are not really a Western experience. But I think if we want to move ahead, it's the kind of thing we're going to have to do. And I think the City Club is a perfect place to begin beating the drum for this kind of step forward. I'd like to talk just for a moment again about the Lower Willamette, because this is one of the most urgent and complex responsibilities that I feel as Executive Director of the Port. Most of the challenges related to our role in the Lower Willamette, we inherited the old-fashioned way when the state legislature, Governor McCall, decided to merge the Port Commission with the Commission on Public Docks, which was a city agency. We took the good, the bad, and the ugly. I wish we'd known what ugly really looked like, but so much for that. And in 2000, after considerable study, the EPA declared a Superfund site, appropriately, in my view. There's a lot of bad stuff in the Lower Willamette. 13 different entities, the port, the city, and several private companies banded together, signed a voluntary agreement to proceed. And our basic goal was expeditious, effective, and cost-effective. Let's get going. Let's make this happen as quickly as we possibly can, because time really is money in Superfund cleanups. This is an enormously challenging and difficult proposition. And I'm here to tell you that the 13 of us so far have spent $36 million in this endeavor, and not one drop has been cleaned from the Willamette River. Now, this is a matter of great concern to us because after a while, we're out of money, all right? And we want to be sure that this cleanup occurs as effectively as it can, because these are our facilities, we live here, we're part of this community. It's a very important thing for us to do. So why is that? Well, we're being buffeted, I think. We collectively are being buffeted by some fairly natural forces, one of which is there's always more information to have or more information to get. We've taken about 4,000 samples of sediment or animal tissue or water sample of one sort or another. The EPA would like to expand the territory involved. They'd like to go a little further upriver. They'd like to go a little further downriver. They'd like to have more samples. And it'd be great to have. It's very expensive. It takes time. You can only do this at certain times of the year. And so they are naturally inclined to want to have more information. I am inclined to want to get on with things and make this happen. Here's the other challenge. There are 13 of us who have voluntarily stepped up, but there are many, many, many more who've been laying in the woods. We'd like to see the EPA use its authority and its power to, shall we say, encourage them to become participants with us in shouldering this important burden for our community. When back in the days when Henry here was my lawyer and I was in the governor's office, I was involved briefly in this, and I remember oh so well before the Superfund was declared, a meeting with the EPA and their lawyers, and they brought their big club in and said, well, if you don't do it, we'll make you do it, and so on and so forth. And the club has since disappeared, and we would like to see it return from the closet and be put to effective use to get everybody who has a role in the cleanup of this river at the table. And while they're at the table, let's get going, because time is wasting, and time is not good for the river, it's not good for the community, and it's not good for the commercial activities which are so important to us. The other thing I'd like to say, the DEQ in Oregon has a very important responsibility here, and that is to manage the uplands pollution that goes along with the in-water work. And in Oregon, to be blunt, the DEQ has suffered the ill effects of starvation, which I think has been in part intentional. If they don't have any money, they're going to have a harder time doing their job. But I can certainly say in this case, the impact is deadly. Because if they're not able to do their work, if they're not able to manage this process effectively, this cleanup is going to take forever. And so I'm calling on the next session of the legislature, the governor, to increase those resources for the DEQ. Fee-based, general fund, I don't care, we'll pay, let's get going. Give them the role, give them the responsibility, give them the resources to do their job. Finally, I just want to touch on land use, and I want to do that because this last week, I think, has really underscored the role that land use plays in things that most of us might not think about every day. So Wednesday, as I mentioned to you, I was up at the City Council along with several hundred others to talk about a proposal from the Linton Neighborhood Association that would put housing on the site of the former Linton plywood mill. And by itself, that's fine, except that it is bounded north and south by two enormous fuel tank farms. This little region in here from the Kinder Morgan facility for probably 1.5 miles or 2 miles up the river is what is euphemistically known as the energy cluster. It is where we get about 90% of the fuel oil that is used in all of Oregon and portions of western Idaho and eastern Washington, which gets there by barge. It is honeycombed with pipelines. In fact, there is a pipeline from the Kinder Morgan facility out to the airport because that's where all the jet fuel comes from. The fuel gets to these facilities from the Olympic pipeline that comes down from Seattle, about 80% of it. Some of it comes up the Columbia River in vessels, so deep draft requirements are there. And by introducing a dense residential neighborhood into the center of this long-tenured industrial facility, which is not going to be moved, there is no place. How many people here are going to sign up in their neighborhood plan for a gasoline tank farm? Not many. It's there. It's going to stay there. And by introducing these competing and conflicting uses, we are bound to create conflict after conflict after conflict, and something that will not serve us, and I think ultimately not serve the residents of Linton. Now, I know this because we also operate airports. And one of the, in fact, I can see here, I'm just looking around at my employees, several of them here are directly involved all the time in airport noise issues. So you think, on the one hand, gee, you buy a house near an airport, there's going to be noise, tough, deal with it. And that goes for the first round, okay, you buy a brand new house next to an airport, you know, but buyer number 3, buyer number 4, buyer number 5, they don't care. And so we see these conflicts all the time. I got a stack of letters this high that our staff, or in some cases I, have sent to various policymakers in the region just saying, oh, by the way, this little subdivision you're going to plat here, it's next to an airport, we make noise, and if they're too close, we require, and the city has cooperated with this, the property owners to sign a little waiver. I had a public meeting not long ago in Hillsborough. A woman came up and she was very unhappy about the noise. I said, so is this the waiver you signed when you bought your house? Yes, it's the waiver I signed when I bought my house. Well, tell me, well, I didn't pay any attention to it. I didn't think it was really going to be noisy. So this land use conflict is important because we're not moving the airport. We're not going to move this gasoline tank farm. There's no place to put it. And the situation in Hillsborough is I think, another apt example. This is a real tragedy. Robert Guilford, a very passionate pilot, very extraordinary in the kind of the antique aircraft community. 20 years ago, his plane would have landed in an open field. Okay, it hit a home. It hit a home that was built very close to the airport. So these land use conflicts are meaningful and very important. And the truth is there are now a lot of people who live close to that airport or who live close to PDX who one of these days are going to start beating the drum and say, hey, let's move these things. You know, we've got these dense residential facilities. Let's get them out of here. Let's move them. And the expense and the cost of doing that is more than this community is ever going to want to bear. So I think I raise this because I think that these conflicts have finally come home to the urban areas. Most of the land use battles over the last 25 years have been about farms and forest. Now they're about vital urban infrastructure, and it's just as important to protect that infrastructure as it is to protect the farms and the forests of rural Oregon. The final example, my good friend Royce Pollard, I say that because I have great affection for him. He's a terrific guy. He's the mayor of Vancouver, does a wonderful job, and he and his city council are rezoning and replatting all of their riverfront industrial land. It's all going to be residential. The jet tracks go directly over the top. We send them a letter every time they do it. And a very good portion of the complaints we get about airport noise come from people who have moved into areas directly under the flight path. And so just a sweet little message from your friendly port director. You're going to hear more about this because these are conflicts that are going to grow in the urban area. As things become more dense, as the population grows, these conflicts are going to become very important, and they do impede our ability to be effective. If the airport, for example, starts to, in some future years, if we have to begin operating on a reduced schedule, it's going to have a meaningful impact on your ability to go where you need to go. And those are the kinds of things that are happening in other regions in other parts of the country. So we're going to be pretty tough about that. But I think, this is really what Portland is about in many cases, and that is about being able to kind of share these and kick it around and maybe get bounced around a little bit. It's part of what I really like about this community. The port's been around for 115 years, so we're not going away. We're going to continue to try and provide leadership on these and other very important issues. I thank you very much for your kind attention and look forward to my first question from my former lawyer, who I'm sure remembers how well treated he was at my hands. Thank you.
A privilege of membership in City Club is to ask questions of our guest speakers. A question in this context lasts 30 seconds or less and ends with a question mark. The first question will be asked by our board host, Chip Lazenby. Chip is an attorney with the law firm of Bullivan Hauser Bailey, and as you've picked up, he was the former legal counsel to Governor John Kitzhaber. He's also former general counsel to the Portland Development Commission. Chip.
Thank you, Susan. Bill, your remarks were really tremendous in terms of focusing Portland in a global context. But it's clear that you also have the potential and are, as the port, of being a tremendous part of our local economy in terms of creating jobs. We talk about doing economic development in this area as regional. You talked about Vancouver, and all of the discussion is there. As the director of the port, what 3 things would you want to say to regional economic development planners that would assist the port in being more competitive, because you're in a very competitive world, but also provide a benefit to our local economic development in terms of local businesses and creating jobs?
Well, I just said one of them, land use, because we're very asset-centric at the port. Riverfront land, for example, is important. Unlike the old days, we don't get to make any more. So many of the assets that we have, Rivergate, Swan Island, we created the old-fashioned way, with our own dredge, and that's not going to happen anymore. So protect what we have, even if it means, saying no to the next 1,000-unit point tower, if that's what it is going to require, because these are assets that are really important to our future success. I think the port, over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, will probably spend $500 million in capital construction for various projects, all the way from a new parking facility out at the airport to a baggage detection system that none of you will ever see but will enjoy and experience when it's concluded, to just a ton of marine-related rail projects. And part of the thing that we're struggling with now, and I know the Development Commission has struggled with this as well, Bruce and I have talked about this, is how can we manage these projects in a way that best benefits people in Portland through the use of the construction resources and, of course, through the end projects. And that's tough because some of the local interests have really competing interests. And balancing that is a challenge, and I know that you were very involved, Chip, in the creation of the CAUSE program, and I forget the acronym, but basically this is designed to increase the pool of skilled workers in this region. We're running out of pipe fitters and plumbers and electricians. What can we do to use our resources, our construction resources, to increase that pool? And while we're doing that, can we make it a more diverse pool? And I think those are important things for those of us who are managing these projects. Not a simple job, but I think it's very important for us. There was a third, but you just get 2.
Ron Paul, City Club Board of Governors. Bill, in 1994 in Lillehammer, Norway, the Winter Olympics were a major attraction. Simultaneously, Amsterdam, in its Schiphol airport, began a robust marketing campaign as a favored port of entry. 2010 has the Winter Olympics in Vancouver. What is Portland doing, similar to what Amsterdam did, to brand Portland as a port of entry for that event?
Well, there are efforts underway. I know that Travel Oregon, which is actually the state's travel commission, and POVA in particular, have been very focused on these Olympics and at attracting visitors. Now, I get questions like this often, and I would say this: we don't own any planes. We don't purchase services directly. We have the airport. We're a part of all of these discussions, and there is quite a bit of work going on now, although I am not directly involved with that, to use this as leverage to get more people here before and after the Olympics. It's a great opportunity, particularly with our European flight. Germans like winter things, and we think it's a great opportunity to bring them here. Lufthansa doesn't fly to Seattle, they come to Portland. So we think it's a terrific opportunity.
Chris Smith, City Club member. Bill, congratulations on the Connect Oregon funding. You mentioned denial, so I want to bring up the cost of congestion study. That proposes that we could marginally reduce the impact of congestion on moving goods and services by spending about $6 billion in building new capacity, much of which would be used by passenger cars rather than trucks. What are your creative ideas for how we could adopt a more selective investment strategy or reconceptualize how we move goods and services into, out of, and around the region?
Well, since we don't have $6 billion, it's a really selective investment strategy. And that's kind of, for our part, what we've done. We have focused primarily on the most urgent corridors. Columbia Boulevard is a very good example. If you've ever been to the air cargo facilities in Portland, you have this experience of coming off an interstate freeway, and then you get on Columbia Boulevard, and then you turn left on 47th, and you feel like you are in Burns, Oregon, this rural stretch of road. And so, frankly, for our purposes, that's what we're doing, is targeting our resources and our requests at the things that are most urgent. Marine Drive from I-5 to Terminal 6 is a terrific piece of infrastructure which the port largely paid for. And so, I think, Chris, our direct port focus is on those things that most directly relate to our facilities. I do think there is a larger discussion to be had. I was here when the presentation was made on the cost of congestion study, and I think the freight community, if you will, is quite open to whatever devices, tolling and related devices that might distinguish between kinds and types of traffic, which I think would be entirely appropriate. Whether the traveling public is ready for that, I don't know. But I think we're very, very open to that. I told you earlier that if you didn't ask a question, I was going to call on you. So, yeah.
Well,
right.
thank you very much. Ray Polani, a City Club member. The title of your speech was Connecting Portland to the Global Economy. How about connecting Oregon to the global economy? And in that context, I think cooperation is better than competition within Oregon. So let me give you an example. Sharing the container business with Astoria, using the railroad line, to move the containers to and from Portland would help the Astoria area very much, would not harm considerably the Portland area, and would preserve or restore the Columbia River. And as I understand it, you were born in Astoria. How about this sharing?
Well, let me just say, if there was a way to move any segment or portion of the container business to Astoria, I'd be all over it, because these carriers don't need the extra 7 hours of travel time to Portland. But, and this is a big but, okay, it's a very competitive business, and here are the following ingredients in the container business. Ships, okay, someone has to own them. Then you've got to have berth space, building enormous berths. Our Terminal 6 is about the size of downtown Astoria, just by comparison. Then you've got to have high-speed rail. And if you're involved with local cargo at all, you've got to have trucks. So Astoria fails on kind of 3 counts, okay? They potentially could have deep water, although that's as challenging there in some respects as it is in Portland because of the jetties and the mouth. There's no land in Astoria, and if you look at a topographical map of the lower Columbia River, there just is no land where it needs to be in order to accomplish something like this. Tongue Point has, I think, the flat portion of Tongue Point is about 30 acres, most of it, by the way, already consumed. And the rail system all the way into Astoria is very marginal, no, it's not. It's owned by the Portland and Western Railroad. And there is only a highway, not a freeway, into Astoria. The land issue is huge. Now, I would say this, the global pressure on containerized imports is so enormous. Wherever there's a dent in the real estate, someone's out there looking. These carriers and terminal operators are looking everywhere, and I think we're into an era where we're going to start seeing developments that are unusual and something you would never have imagined 3 or 4 years ago. One example up in Vancouver is Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert is about the size of this ballroom, I think, but they're connected directly with the Canadian National Railroad, and they have deep water. And this is a strategy by a terminal operator to bring vessels in, put the boxes on a train, and send it to eastern Canada. And I think you're going to start seeing more of this. Astoria doesn't happen to be a very good target for that, unfortunately. I'd love it if it were, but I think that's very, very unlikely in a really sensitive ecosystem that is the mouth of the Columbia. I just think it's unlikely. But there are other places you could probably think of them.
Jody Weiser, City Club member. You spoke proudly of the new jobs that the crane was creating, the longshoreman jobs, but there have been a lot of jobs that were created because of 9/11. Are those jobs being paid for by our fees, or are people who don't use the airport at all for either professional or pleasure use actually having to pick up the cost in hospital emergency rooms or the organ health plan or subsidized housing?
I presume you're talking about like the Transportation Security Administration workers.
Right. Are they,
Okay.
how well are they paid?
Yeah, they are, I want to be careful about this, but I think they are paid by a combination of fee, ticket fee. So when I don't even know if it's printed on the ticket anymore because I don't even know if tickets are printed. But there is a fee that Congress imposed, and they're looking at increasing that. And they then also appropriated resources shortly after 9/11 to create this workforce. Over time, to be honest, all of this is going to be part of the air transportation system. The airport itself is paid for entirely by resources that it generates, either through passengers or landing fees or whatever. So Congress has appropriated a fairly small amount of money in relative terms for these workers. I believe they have good benefits. They're fairly well paid. They're good positions. But our fear, and it's being borne out, is that Congress is appropriating less and less every year. And so you'll start seeing this reflected in the cost of transportation.
Okay. Sorry to say we're out of time. If you'd like to continue the discussion, please feel free to go to the website and join the discussion on the Citizens blog. I'd like to thank you, Bill Wyatt, for a most stimulating, enlightening view from the vantage point of the Port of Portland. I'd like to thank our guests and our members for being here today, and I'd like to thank our radio and TV audience for your interest in the City Club of Portland. Thank you all, and we are adjourned.